He was a Wagner one. He was a Wagner one. That was in Chassev Yar.
A mercenary.
Yeah, in January towards February. Now we don't have stabilization points there anymore. Some of them have been blown away, but we had to remove his clothes and do a re-inspection, because you can't take a chance with certain things, like if there's wounds, penetrative trauma, suck-in chest wounds. I had to inspect him. Had to be quite gentle, you know. He didn't say a word. He didn't say a word the whole time. No.
Not even in pain.
It was a concussion. I've seen men in horrible pain, groaning, maybe even crying for their mothers, if I understood the language. I've seen other people not say a word. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Timesradio with me, Kate Chabot, and this time an extraordinary insight into what it's like to be a combat medic on the front line in Ukraine. Brandon Mitchell is from Canada. He served 4.5 years in the Canadian and British armies. When the war broke out in Ukraine, he headed straight there. He didn't know what he was going to do when he got there, but he did know he wanted to volunteer. Well, now he spent 13 months in the country and 9 of those months in the Donbass region, and he joins us now. Brandon, really good to speak to you. Thank you so much for coming in. Can you just explain where you were deployed and what you did?
Thank you very much for having me, Kate. Well, like everybody, I started in Lviv. I was invited to join Hospitaler's Medical Battalion, and this is a volunteer, unpaid battalion with the Ukrainian Army. Our job, we make ambulance teams. We basically plug holes. We're seconded to different brigades all across the country for a time period, a month, 2 months. I received medical training in Kiev, and actually in the basement of St. Michael's, a very prominent church. My first deployment was on the Zaporizhia front, 1 month in a hospital. And there I learned more and more about good and bad pre-hospital care. From that point on, it followed on for about 5-6 weeks to a frontline position where medics wait. Zaporizhia, probably over 2 months, and cumulatively in the Donbass region, mainly around Bakhmut and Soledar, over 9 months, until I left 3 weeks ago.
And when you're deployed there to that frontline position, can you just describe what daily life is like?
Yeah, I used to romanticize war. I read a lot of books about it. I studied it. I'd never been to war, and I remember how they talk about waiting all the time, and I never thought it'd be so long, if I'm completely honest with you. Medics, casualty evacuation role, will live in houses. It depends on the terrain, the situation. I've lived in houses 4 kilometers from the Russians, 3, but I remember my first one in Zaporizhia. It used to shake every night. It'd shake at night, shake sometimes at day, and I was pretty green, but keen to do well. And some of the Ukrainians that spoke English would say, "Oh, that's a kilometer away," but you really feel it. But you have to wait there by a radio for a meeting point to pick up casualties. That's well, I don't want to disappoint, but the biggest thing about it is the waiting until it's time to go.
So what happens? You get the radio call, they give you the location, and you just head straight out?
Yes, and that location could be, again, depending on terrain, scenario, we'll have multiple pickup points, maybe 2 or 3 different ones. That could be 1 kilometer from the fighting. That could be 2 kilometers. It's really changed a lot over the war, thanks to, I believe it's called Lend-Lease. I've seen a progression in casualty evacuation.
And when you got that call and when you headed out to rescue those casualties, what kind of risks were you running? What did you have to look out for?
Well, jumping ahead a bit, but I've been a victim of Russian mines. But generally the waiting points, depending on the time of the year, whether we have tree cover, there's a lot of different considerations. In the winter, you just simply don't have it. Probably one of the biggest issues is driving at night, closer to the lines. I'm quite resigned to artillery and mortar, which can happen quite a bit closer.
When you say I'm quite resigned, what do you mean?
Well, I've got to do my job, you know. When people, all the journalists like to say, "Oh, you're in artillery range," it doesn't mean much to me. That's 20 kilometers away. Well, it hasn't been my time to go. Mortar can be more accurate and quick to adjust, but it's the direct fire weapons. I knew a medic, Pete Reed. I only met him a couple of times. He was killed by a direct fire, a rocket launcher. This is the real concern driving at night. I've been in some collisions at low speeds with other Ukrainian vehicles. My friend Nico, I was living in Sweden at the time. 5 of us came March 16th. Nico died in an accident going from Soledar to Bakhmut, a casualty evacuation. That was early December. A tank, or a BMP to be specific, pulled out of the field onto the road very quick. And when you have to drive in blackout conditions, Nico died later that night. But you can't drive with your lights on within eyesight of the Russians, potentially in the hills.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, me too.
And in terms of the actual, you said that journalists will say to you, you're within 20 kilometres of artillery fire. Have you actually come under fire when you're actually rescuing someone, and how close has it got for you?
Oh, lots of times. I think maybe the closest one, the closest actual artillery round, they're quite a bit bigger. Oh, maybe about 300 meters. I was driving into it, but the saving grace of it, I actually had it recorded on my camera. I put it on Instagram to fundraise. It helps, but
It's incredible you have to do that.
Yeah, well, yeah. If you don't fundraise, you don't have. We can talk about that. That's another subject. But the saving grace was it landed in the middle of the building and not on the road. So that absorbed the building. The building collapsed, but it took the impact.
And what about the double tap attacks that we've heard about? Have you ever experienced that, where you've had to go in after there's been an attack and come under attack yourself, where you've been lured into a trap effectively?
I can't say specifically with certainty, but I do have experience in Soledar, driving to East Soledar under machine gun fire, but overhead. Whether that was intended for me or not, I don't know. I can't give you an answer because I'm not really sure if it was intended for me. It doesn't really matter. Act appropriately, I suppose.
What did you do?
I got scared, and I as we used to say in boxing, I bit down on my gum shield, and I drove forward. I did my job.
Just kept going.
Yeah, crack on.
Can you talk about the units that you work with, how they're structured?
Okay, so when a hospitalers team is deployed with a brigade to support Army Medical, I've worked with 1st Armoured Brigade, my first experience. I know what I'm told. I'm quite unique amongst the foreigners. I don't demand too much translation. If it's important, they'll tell me later. And they'll have battalions that form up this brigade. I know mainly about the medical evacuation. We have different elements, and I can't tell you how all of them work. Sometimes there's civilian elements that help us too, mostly Ukrainian. I brought people from 1 kilometer back to a medical stabilization point. A medical stabilization is an improvised hospital. People always say, why don't you use those tents like MASH? Well, drone warfare kind of negated that. But unassuming buildings, we would have hospitals. We would be responsible in those buildings for people who couldn't make it to the hospital, but they could come from different brigades as well. Okay, I learned a lot about that in Zaporizhia, medical stabilization. Onwards to Soledar, the famous 93rd Brigade. I know those units. I've heard rumors, but if you hear the same thing from Ukrainians a few times, you're pretty sure. They would have had at times over 6,000 men, maybe 7,000. I heard 1st Armour Brigade, when was it 1500 when the war started, they swelled to about 7,000. I know about the famous 93rd Brigade. I've worked with them. Don't ask me numbers, but I know they've cycled through many times with casualty replacement. Massive numbers. New soldiers coming. It's quite a big thing, a brigade.
Yes.
In a town, a village, just one brigade in one town, maybe two brigades on one edge of the town or another village.
When you actually arrived in Ukraine, it was decided that you were going to become a combat medic.
Yes.
How was that decided?
Initially, it was a bit reluctant on my part. I made myself a promise that I wouldn't lie going to Ukraine. I would tell the truth. And right before I even left my house, before I left my flat, I broke that. I made a lie. My neighbour seen me with a kit. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to Ukraine." She said, have you been to war before?" And impulsively I said yes, because I'd be a damn fool, wouldn't I, if I didn't have any experience. Yeah. But I didn't lie, or I tried my best to tell the truth after. I crossed over with some seasoned combat veterans, Swedish boys, combat medics. They'd been to Afghanistan. I never thought about the army in years. They had a contact from Lviv to go to Kiev, to join Hospitalers. And I was reluctant. I thought, well, I wouldn't want to get anybody hurt from my lack of combat skills. If I couldn't change a magazine in 1 second of the time they do, I had an imagination, you understand. But they said, "Would you like to join?" And I said, "My God, maybe I could be a driver. You know, I'm pretty handy with a Sprinter or a transit van. I worked in the events industry for years. Maybe I could be an ambulance driver." That wasn't to be. They asked me initially, "Would you be a gunner in security for an ambulance?" And we don't have any driver positions available, but during the Battle of Kiev, some gunner positions had become recently available. That was a bit foreshadow. I agreed. I didn't see any fighting in the Battle of Kiev. I trained for 10 days on a course in the basement of St. Michael's Church. And it was an American nurse who's very inspirational, a friend of mine, Rebecca from Colorado. She made an entire English language syllabus for the small amount of foreigners. And we trained. I gave my first IV in 3 days in training. It was a huge mental hurdle. Okay, I've progressed quite a bit since then. And yeah, do you want to join or not? So I joined the battalion.
What are the other foreign forces like, foreign volunteers who you've worked with?
Sure. I judge people by their intention, regardless of their qualification or what they say their experience is. And that's medical, combat soldiers, humanitarian workers. When I joined my battalion, I'm told that our numbers were less than 100. Hospitalers have been around since 2014, but we've swelled thanks to foreign donations and medical supplies, ambulances. When I came to Kiev during the Battle of Kiev, there might have been 40, 50 foreigners from all over the world. South Africa, America, British, French. I think we even had some people from South America as well. And I was quite amused actually when I came there. Some people came from no medical background, and they were looking to fight. They wanted a weapon as soon as possible. Why did they come to a medical battalion? I found the medical volunteers to be of the most pure intention, and I really gravitated to them. Despite having a security role, I was really inspired by people like my friend Edouard, a brilliant French intern in emergency medicine. He would teach me. Rebecca from Colorado. I tried to avoid the people who said on the first day they wanted a gun. Mm. Yeah. A lot of people came to Ukraine for different reasons. But there's some fantastic people, regardless of how long they stayed. Many of the best people I know, particularly medical, they went home bankrupt.
Really?
Yeah. Well, if you had a good life as a good nurse, a doctor, you'd have some trappings of life, wouldn't you? You might have a car, you might have a mortgage, but you have no income. You're burning the bridge at both ends. I've seen people last 3 months, 6 months. I've seen one of my friends, Rebecca. She went home for 3 months and worked overtime, extreme overtime, to get back again. That's a real shame. You're essentially burning the candle at both ends as a volunteer in Ukraine. It's highly commendable for people like her.
And what about the Ukrainians on the front line? How did you find them?
Well, initially, a lot of them were skeptical of us.
The forces?
Yeah, the foreigners. They were skeptical of foreigners, particularly in Kiev, and I was lucky to be in a medical battalion, high education levels. Many of them spoke English, like a much higher percentage. I would think at least 40%, perhaps even 50% spoke English. Later on, as my war progressed, I've worked from liberated territories all the way into Luhansk Oblast. So many Ukrainians that don't speak English. Some of them are my best friends. I've learned about maybe 50 words or more of Ukrainian and Russian. Those are some of my best friends. It's just an energy.
It's really interesting when you said before that when you're given orders, you kind of know when it's important for you to listen and you don't actually have to understand everything that's going on. How does that actually work in a combat situation? I mean, do you just like have a sort of instinct of when you need to really listen or what you need to know?
I'm very grateful for my first month. I expected my first month of deployment to work in a hospital. Okay, maybe I'm alive because of that. I don't want to be dramatic. But what I learned, it's the first hospital from the point where we were fighting, and not speaking the language, not coming from a medical background. When an ambulance would come in, we'd get very quick notice. Maybe 4 or 5 people would rush to that casualty to get them on the gurney to bring them in. Mm. And what I learned, I had to push, like the runt of the litter. I'd have to push to get in part of that algorithm. And my first weapon of war was a pair of scissors, paramedic scissors. But I learned very quickly the algorithm to stabilize a casualty, to get them to Zaporizhia or Dnipro, where they go. All our job to do in there was to clear a pathway for a surgeon, an anesthesiologist. And there was so much work, but it had to be done. It took about 20-25 minutes, and they would move on to the next. But even without the language, if I was there right from the beginning, I could follow the whole algorithm through, and I learned more along the way. If I was 2-3 minutes late, maybe I'd gone to the loo, say for example, it did not work. Don't ask me how, because I wasn't there from beginning to end. And just to do my job, and that actually ended. I assisted with surgery for a couple of times with Igor. He speaks no English, but I can hold hemostat clamps and I can peel skin back. I know where he's going with the scalpel. Yeah, I watched and I learned.
You say your first weapon of war was the scissors.
Yes.
How are you armed now?
Oh, am I armed? Hospitallers does not issue weapons as a point. People are entitled in Ukraine to buy their own weapons. Very liberal gun laws. I suppose that's a good thing. At the brigade level, they can issue weapons. Medics, it's a free choice. Many carry, many do not.
And you?
Yes. I generally worked, especially places like Soledar. I tried not to carry one working civilian evacuations. I've worked with civilians as well. Nice to leave it in the vehicle.
Why is that?
Why is that? Well, a weapon maybe isn't a friendly thing to go around a grandmother, to go around children. And one thing about this war, you can almost be damn sure, the enemy knows where you are and we know where they are. And it's, I was never in Iraq, Afghanistan. This is not an insurgency war. Mm-hmm. I know of nobody personally, except during the Battle of Kiev, that was ambushed driving along the road behind the lines. You know, I've only been to Russian side. I can count on my hand how many times I've seen Russians.
I was going to say, have you ever you never come face to face with a Russian?
I've been shot at by them. I've not seen the white of their eyes like they used to say in the old days. We've had Russian prisoners as well. We've transported.
I was going to ask that as well. Yeah.
No, I don't like weapons. I've only fired my weapon twice, and the one time I hit something, it was a drone, and it turned out to be Ukrainian. So that's my contribution. That's my contribution to combat, if I'm honest. We've had Russian prisoners.
What do you do with a Russian prisoner?
Well, the first thing from a medical point of view, the people I've encountered, I've only had one with penetrative trauma in his leg, okay, and with a tourniquet that can be quickly solved. Hemostatic agents to assist with further bleeding stop, but they were concussions. It's the single greatest injury, traumatic brain injury in this war, okay. We need to transport them. They're blindfolded, okay. Their hands will be restrained, whether you've got, I've seen with string, not so much rope, with cable ties, and they're brought to a medical point. But there's always an armed guard there. Everybody from a medical point of view is always very curious. It's more curiosity than anything. If I can be completely honest, I've even been tempted to make some off-color remarks to them. Not that they speak English.
Have you?
No, I haven't. I had a moment of humility. It's not my kill. It's not my capture. I'm just if there was honor in war, it was not mine to take. Yeah, I wanted to speak English to him and let him know that I'm one of those horrible, horrible Nazi mercenaries that they've been told about. I'm not paid. I'm not Nazi.
Did you have to comfort this person?
Yeah, he was a Wagner one. He was a Wagner one. That was in Chasiv Yar.
A mercenary.
Yeah, in January towards February. Now we don't have stabilization points there anymore. Some of them have been blown away. But we had to remove his clothes and do a re-inspection, because you can't take a chance with certain things, like if there's wounds, penetrative trauma, suck-in chest wounds. I had to inspect him. Had to be quite gentle, you know. He didn't say a word. He didn't say a word the whole time. No.
Not even in pain.
It was a concussion. I've seen men in horrible pain, groaning, maybe even crying for their mothers if I understood the language. I've seen other people not say a word. Yeah.
Do you think he made it?
I have no doubt he did. Just purely judging by his injuries, of course. There's a simple course for us. There's 3 drugs we'd administer for a concussion, as a matter of course. From a further point of care, I can't say what happened to him. But I do know if he required further, he would have been transported to Kostantinivka, further back, Pokrovsk. I know the medical care gets done.
You mentioned earlier that you were injured yourself. This was when you drove over some mines.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that was the most frightening part for you, or was it such a surprise that you didn't have time to be afraid?
No. The scariest thing was the events leading up to the mine. There's only probably 2 times in the war I've been that scared for what was on the table. Some people have said I'm brave. Other people say I'm crazy. But if you were crying out of a window of a burning building, if someone went in, would you call them crazy? No. I was helping with civilian evacuation in Soledar with civilian evacuation in the summer. It was very busy. The work, high volume. By I mean the people willing to leave. When the danger increases, when they see a neighbor die, all of a sudden they want to leave. If it's a kilometer away, it's almost abstract to them. We were very busy in August with this work, but we pushed further east. And, a couple of days before, I came under my first overhead machine gun fire. Maybe I told you that.
And that was it?
It was scary, everything leading up to it, because we were pushing even further beyond that. And sometimes it's so calm. It's so calm. And do you know, if I told you the truth, when it's dead quiet, I'm more scared than when I can hear something. But we got, the night I was blowing up, my last evacuation from East Soledar, there was 4 children. And between the 2 vehicles, we got 9 people out. But 4 children. I gave one little boy my helmet. I hit 2 Russian anti-personnel mines later on. But why be scared of what you can't see coming? That's what I suppose you should really be worried about.
Well, it's good to see you're okay. I know it's had some lasting effect on you, the injuries you had, yeah.
I'm doing the best I can. I've had some cognitive decline, but overall, I like to think I'm still quite competent.
In terms of the injuries you've seen and what you've witnessed, have you witnessed any Russian atrocities?
Yes, I have. I'm very glad you asked me about that. Lemonsky region, or Limon, however you want to pronounce it. I was involved with the liberation of that area, and in the town of Yampol, north of Siversk. I know these areas quite well. I was there on the first day of liberation, and we went to a med point, and there was a brown leather satchel, and this is not what I've seen. This is what I was told directly. I'll tell you about what I've seen. In this satchel, there was graph paper, and there was names on it, and there was a lot of names written on it, and there was other things. It turned out to be that was a list of civilians that were executed in the town, and another team. I'm not sure if it was with 95 Brigade, but they discovered a mass grave. More or less 300 names on that. Yampol probably had 2,000 people in population. There was a woman that wanted to speak to the army and the security services. This was all happening like as we discovered this, but she wanted to leave the town because there might still be Russian sympathizers. She hadn't left her house by the time she refused to leave her house, but when soldiers cleared her house, she wanted to be evacuated, and she wanted to talk to security services about this, and a grave that wasn't recovered at the time, where Ukrainian soldier POWs were executed. What I have seen is the scars on a woman's back. Makiivka is a village in Luhansk Oblast, what we hold, and she's a math and physics teacher. And when we liberated it, she didn't want to leave. She's what we call an activist who helps distribute humanitarian food equitably and also convince people to leave because she's a local. Old nurses are very effective at this, but it's usually a matriarch. Chechen soldiers went into her house with her husband during the occupation, and they demanded that they show them the weapons they were hiding, and if they did not, they would commit another bucha in her house. They cut her back, and one of them filmed it and uploaded it on his Telegram, and that's in. I know for a fact that I've no desire to watch that, but that's documented in Ukraine by the police. I know I've met that woman several times. I've seen the scars on her back.
And as a combat medic and a volunteer, what do you think you've been able to contribute?
Well, I wasn't a medic before I came in. My last month before I came back, I worked in Avdiivka direction. I lived in a village, and an S-300 missile, by the grace of God, it hit the soft ground, but it blew out a wall in my house, and there was 2 men outside that were wounded. But that was the first time I only did my first IV on Rebecca in training. That was the first time in a combat situation in the dark with screaming and blood that I ran IV lines, and I didn't occlude properly. If there's any medics listening, the first one there was a lot of blood, but they were good lines. I'm not a medical professional. I've done what I've learned and what I've been taught. I'm not a best medic. That's the truth. My contribution, I'm a foreigner. I have social media. If I lose a finger, the world cries.
Do you think your military training has helped at all?
Very little.
Really?
Very little.
Because?
Because a lot of foreign volunteers that came, probably more competent than me. I don't know what they've seen in Afghanistan and know what they profess, but a lot of them talk about what you can't do. The Ukrainians were never told what they couldn't do. And I've worked with Ukrainians.
So what does that translate into, do you mean? Can you give me an example?
Yeah. If you don't know, if you don't have intelligence, you go 500 meters. You find another soldier, you talk to him. And then you go another 500 meters, 200 meters. You stop and you listen. You know where the shots are coming from. We don't have all these fancy things that... Yeah, we have some intelligence, but it's not... we don't have the fancy radios.
Sounds quite basic. That's because you're a volunteer, is it?
No. the most simple things that are most useful to us are things that you can buy in the civilian market. That's what I fundraise for. Starlink internet, have you ever heard of that?
Of course, yeah.
Well, the Russians jam our radios 5 kilometers on a Motorola. If their electronics are there, we can't get 1 kilometer. But if we have a Starlink, we can talk at any distance. I don't know if that's been used before in war, but we find it pretty handy.
As you say, you fundraise.
Yeah.
What do you use the money for?
Well, at least 100 diesel generators. That's when I got blowing up, my stock went up, and so did my YouTube and my Instagram. That's the diesel generators, because I worked on stabilization points. If you don't have power, then when volunteers come or NGOs and they want to give you a defibrillator, well, if you don't have power, you can't use it. So that was my biggest passion, getting another 5 kilowatts of power. But then it turned into Motorola radios, and I learned how to do that. And I learned from civilian volunteers, like a lot of people from IT volunteer in Ukraine, Ukrainians or foreigners, and they can very quickly learn. A lot of those skills are transferable. I've been taught on the job for some of the things I fundraise for. I buy those here in England. They come over every month or so when we have the money. Yeah, radio, those are the main ones. Do you know what else I buy a lot of in Ukraine? Tires. When I say a lot, no less than 20. But I've had to repair my tires the most in 1 week was 5 times, plug holes. That shrapnel and other things is quite...
What kind of vehicle do you use?
Well, my first one, the Pajero, blew up, but I'm glad I got that on camera. There was an American man who comes from Ukrainian heritage. He was quite inspired, and if you would believe this, he flew all the way from somewhere in the Midwest, and he with a German NGO that helps bring the generators over. They had a mechanic, and they helped him buy a Nissan Patrol for me, and he brought, when I was in hospital, he brought all I'd never met him in person. He brought that to Krakow, and probably about a week after I got out of hospital, I went and picked that up. Wow. I've never met him in person. There's people that do that, you know.
It's extraordinary the kind of efforts that people are going to support you, and the stories that you're telling. And you mentioned earlier when you first arrived in the country that the Ukrainian forces weren't that sure about what you guys were doing. Do you know how the authorities view what you're doing now?
Well, my battalion has a high profile. We've done very good work. And because Hospitallers gets moved around to different places, the Army's very well aware of us. There are good and bad teams, I'm not going to lie. So a brigade's impression would be on the last team that was there for a month or two. Most of our teams are very, very good. Our commanding officer is also a woman who's a member of Parliament, and she's in a wheelchair. And she was originally a medic in the old war. She was wounded. Because of her, we have some of the best equipment. And I mean, even not at the beginning of the war, but now we have good helmets, good armor. And that's probably mainly down to social media and people willing to support us from all over the world.
You're going to go back, aren't you?
Yes.
Are you going to go back to the same battalion?
I want to go back to Avdiivka direction, where I worked in. And as a foreigner, I'm a little bit privileged. Also because I'm a breadwinner. I felt the best work.
A breadwinner?
Yeah, I am.
Because of the fundraising you do?
There's some of us, everyone does their thing. I know a beautiful girl, and not to take away from her work, but people just stare at her TikTok, Chica, and she's a good medic, but it's a weird war. I'm sorry to say that, but if you don't have social media, there's even units that have less socks, less boots, less... The Army gives it all, but if you want the extras, you got to go on camera. And
what do you want to do when you go back? What do you hope to achieve?
I worked a bit on some of the Lend-Lease on the armoured carriers. That's a bit scary, if I'm honest. But I got a great satisfaction out of the work. I've started fundraising for night vision. I told you about my friend Nico that died. I've driven with night vision, without the lights on, and some people demand this super expensive stuff. I rather buy cheaper and more if it works. A lot of people in Ukraine have died close to the lines just by going off the road and tired. And you know.
How do you think you're going to look back on this? Are you glad you went?
Yeah, I don't have a regret. It's come at a cost, but I have no regret.
Brandon Mitchell, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. My thanks to Brandon Mitchell, to Louis Sykes, our producer, and to you for watching.